So Mr. Paskovich had been using his history class to preach, you said, for well over a decade.
Right.
And you said no one had ever seriously objected before. He'd become a running joke. Why do you think you're the first person that's ever actually seriously objected? What do you think was preventing people before?
Right. Well, from what I understand, I mean, I received some letters from former students that had this teacher after this whole incident occurred that wrote to me and said, he did the exact same thing when I was a student. And some students even said that they brought it to the attention of their counselor or something like that. But the problem was that the counselor's advice would be, okay, we'll take you out of the class, rather than actually deal with the situation.
They became the problem.
Right, the student became the problem rather than the teacher. So I think part of it was that at the time, we're all 15, 16, 17 years old, somewhere in there. You want to fit in. That's what you do as a student. You know, you want to get along with other students. You don't want to be the lone student out. You want to get along with everybody. And I think a big part of it is that you just simply want to fit in. And anything that fits outside of that, you don't want to do. I think another big problem was that many students don't really understand the problem. A lot of students were defending the teacher, saying that, well, he's just stating his opinion. Well, right. but that in itself is a problem because as an authority figure, anytime he states his opinion as a matter of fact, what he's doing essentially is instructing the students how they should view things. And it gives them a reason to go along with it. So I think that those were the two major issues why students wouldn't do it. And of course, actually dealing with the situation and going through those experiences, I can understand why some students would be pretty scared to do it. But unfortunately, someone has to.
Absolutely. And I don't know if this is also the case, but there seems to be this creeping sense of tolerance of other people's religion trumping the right of someone who's perhaps not of that religion to say, hold on, this isn't appropriate. Mm-hmm. Do you think this tolerance that's allowing perhaps less scrupulous members of religious groups to get a foothold and to get their voice heard above other people, do you think that it's going to be hard to strike a balance between secularism and people's religious rights? How do you strike that balance?
Right, well see, it's an interesting dynamic because there is supposedly this tolerance, but it seems as if usually it's just tolerance for Christianity in general. And in particular, one thing that it seems is not tolerated very often is essentially not believing in a God.
You're on the back foot. You're the bad guy
right.
for breaking their worldview, perhaps.
Right, and in fact, I mean, even during the inauguration of Barack Obama recently, when he included, in his list of Americans, he included the word non-believers.
Oh, yes, I remember.
And a lot of people were furious. Not just to say that he mentioned that awful word, but the fact that he actually included them as fellow Americans. And for some reason, that particular group of people, non-theists, essentially they seem to be often attacked. Now, regarding many Christians, and of course it's hard to talk about this issue when not giving generalizations, and that's a huge problem. So it's very hard not to do. But for the most part, I would say right-wing fundamentalist Christians, for some reason, they like to have both sides of the argument on their side. They like to say we are dominant. We have the most amount of Christians compared to any other religion in America, and therefore we should control how things work. But on the other hand, they also make the claim that they're always being persecuted, that they're always facing challenges, and that they're always trying to be shut down. And I think the reason that they see it that way is because sometimes people say to them, no, you're not allowed to take the foreground on this, it should be equal. And so I think anytime you challenge that, even to the smallest degree, where you do something like what I did, where I tried to stop my teacher from pushing his particular brand of Christian belief on everyone else, people viewed that as an attack on Christianity. And in fact, on the news, I saw one man say that this is an attack on our Lord Jesus Christ.
Really?
And yeah, and I was watching and I was thinking to myself, no.
I never said anything about him.
Right, I never said anything about him. What I'm doing is I'm simply trying to stop a teacher from pushing his beliefs on everyone else. But they view it as they want to see it. And unfortunately, it's very difficult to come up against.
And also another common argument seems to be, it's not like we're living under the Taliban, it's not like we're in Iran. Why should something as small as this be such a big issue?
Right.
Did you come up against that kind of argument? Or what other kind of arguments in that regard did you meet from your detractors?
There were lots of arguments, but for the most part, they were pretty ridiculous.
Yeah.
I mean, when you deal with general issues like that, usually you do hear people say, well, it's not my, I'm not facing that, it's not my problem. Like even when we talk about gay rights in the States, a lot of times I'll be talking to a fellow student and they would say, well, I'm not gay, why should it bother me?
Empathy.
Well, right, and I say, well, I'm not either, but that doesn't mean that you have a concern for the protection of other people's rights. And there were really ridiculous arguments like that I had made up the recordings and that I was sitting at my computer and I wrote a script and then I spoke into a voice changing microphone to make it sound like the
from your castle where you operate from.
all kinds of things, and even my former teacher, he came out publicly that year in one of our local newspapers, and he had said that he had not denied making any comments in that meeting in the principal's office. And so I had to tell them, the Board of Education and the teacher, that I recorded that meeting too. And it was unfortunate because I wasn't going to release that. But luckily I had. And I just saw a pattern constantly, all the time, of them just trying to sweep the issue under the rug and essentially just making things up. But luckily for me, I had all these recordings to back up my point. But eventually they even got, the teacher got a lawyer on his side. And the lawyer tried to make the same kind of arguments that the recordings may not be real, or that I, as a 16-year-old student in a public school, set up my teacher to force him to say these things. It just made no sense because there was really no defense for it other than something that was completely ridiculous. So I guess that's the reason they had to go to those arguments.
Of course, if you've got nowhere else to run.
Right.
And you've mentioned before, I believe, this has been covered a lot in the New York Times.
Right.
You mentioned before that some people who you'd known all your life became hostile to you. Did you lose friends over this? Most.
Yeah, I lost most. It was strange because it was just so quick. One day I'd go to class and we'd be talking just normally, and even some days right after this particular class session in Mr. Paskevich's class, we would go out of the classroom and talk amongst ourselves. And even some of my friends were saying, "I can't believe you just said that. That's crazy." But still, those students were the ones that either just completely stopped talking to me altogether, or would come up to me at some point and call me, fill in whatever blank you want. So yeah, I mean that was it was pretty hard to deal with.
So presumably, if such overarching religion had been left out of your classroom, you would still be getting on with these peers right now. What other reasons do you think for keeping such a divisive and personal thing as religion out of classrooms, out of schools? What other reasons would there be?
School is a place for education.
Yeah.
Right, and I don't think that preaching has a place in education. Now, if they wanted to find a way to teach different religions in one class objectively, without taking sides or anything like that, I may be okay with that. The only problem is that then you have to worry about, well, how do you make sure a teacher is actually going to teach all the religions fairly, and you don't. So that's a problem. But for the most part, it just doesn't have anything to do with education.